Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking with Siew-Fang Law. She's a senior lecturer, peace psychology, Victoria University. Siew-Fang, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Norm.
In our earlier conversation, peace psychology is going to occupy what we've got to say for the next part of the program, but you mentioned that you're actually an atheist. Would you mind giving a bit of an idea, the history of that, how you became, and what's been the influence in your life?
My interest in, I have psychology background. I really go back to when I was still in Malaysia, being Chinese Malaysian, that I have experienced a very different kind of peace and harmony, which is quite unique. I felt generally very peaceful growing up as Chinese Malaysian. Until I left home when I was 17, I went to England. And then I started to realize there's a lot of racial, cultural tensions bubbling up in multiculturalism in Malaysia, where Chinese Malaysians were highly not treated equally, systemic and structural level. We do not have equal access to health or education than the dominant cultural groups, that's the Malay. And then I started to become really interested in multiculturalism, cultural diversity, conflict and conflict resolution. So I did my study and my master's thesis looking at this area until I came to Australia to do my PhD. That was almost 15 years back now. And I bumped into a colleague called Di Bretherton. She is a mentor and a guru, absolutely wonderful peace psychologist. She is the director of International Conflict Resolution Center in University of Melbourne. And we met and we talked, and she has been inspirational to guiding me to looking at linking psychology and peace, and looking at this notion of peace is beyond individual, personal, intrapersonal experience, that is beyond just understanding of harmony within ourselves. And then I started to do more research in this area, and that's and I will really say that it's anyone, regardless of all background or spiritual background, could be benefited from understanding more of peace psychology.
And so your atheism sits where in relation to that? How does that fit? Like, have you always been an atheist?
I have always been an atheist. I would say my family has a little bit more Buddhist background, but not my immediate, like my parents. My parents, they're not non-religious, and then I've been growing up having a little bit of Buddhist practice, but not necessarily as a big believer of religions. That doesn't mean that I'm not interested in spirituality or religion. I am really interested in Christianity and Muslims and in Islam and in Buddhism and in Hinduism. In Malaysia, we have these communities of different faiths in one streets. And we celebrate different spiritual festivals in Malaysia. So I'm really interested in how all the different religions are bringing peace. Yet I also have questioned about whether the connections with the higher level, it's really sit well with me.
Well, does having an atheist perspective, do you think that allows you to perceive the activities of, say, Hindus and Christians and Sikhs and Muslims, etc., in a more neutral way? Does it allow you to make...
I would not use the word neutral. I would say it would probably allow me to look at different spirituality in a different perspective, and I highly respects and regards the worldview of
Yeah.
the believers.
Yes.
I think by being non-believers is almost a different paradigm
Mhm.
and worldview in itself. So I think it is important to have, I hope, to have certain understanding, mutual understanding of believers and non-believers, of spiritual and people less spiritual in the terms of spectrum,
Yes.
rather than in that dichotomy of black and white, you are
Yes.
this or that.
Mhm.
But I think there are broader way of understanding spirituality and peace in the spectrum.
Mhm.
Mm.
Okay, well that comes back to your introduction before about peace psychology. Where would you start with something like that? What's a packed definition of peace psychology? What is it?
It is a very big question, no? And I will maybe start with, because I teach peace psychology as well, and then when I was in the class situation, a lot of psychology students say, what is peace psychology? I learn about clinical psychology, learn about counseling, and learn about others form of psychology, and what is peace psychology? And I often get them to discuss it. Now let's have a chat about what this peace means to you. So
Yes.
I could form the class into 3 groups, for example. One group of students will really just define what peace means to themselves.
Yes.
And the other group will look at what conflict means to them.
Yes.
And the third group will look at what violence means to them. And then in that small group discussion, they already come up with all kind of definition. Some might say that peace is really about being harmony, is meditate, and an absence of war and conflict. And the others will come up with totally different things. It's about being spiritual and being others. So even in that small group, they come up with different definition. And then we kind of move on to look at how understanding intrapersonal level of psychology and peace, it's not sufficient. We also need to look at system and structure and institution. How, to what extent that peace is embedded in everyday basis. And the system and structural level of peace is a bit like, I'm kind of linking to violence. Violence is something that people could see. You can see blood, you can see, injuries, you can see sadness. But when we're looking at that, the structural level of violence is something more...
I don't want to interrupt you in your flow, but I have to because time has taken its toll. We'll be back in a moment.
Mani Allah, Alleluia, Mani Allah.
Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. And today we're speaking with Siew-Fang Law. She's a senior lecturer in peace psychology at Victoria University. Siew-Fang, before we went to the break, you were talking about your students and asking them those 3 questions, which leads on into the common or the lack of commonality of the way in which people see peace. How do you bring that into some sort of an interpretable structure?
Yeah, so when a lot of people looking at peace is absence of war and conflict, but peace is not necessarily it. A lot of peace, definition of peace, understanding of peace is about action. It's about doing peace, peace building, conflict resolution, peacemaking. These are all related about peace, being active. So by defining peace as an absence of conflict and violence, it's a passive mode of peace. It's slightly utopian. It's just something is going to happen if you don't do anything about it. So peace being active is a really big part of peace psychology. So looking at that structural and systemic notions of peace and violence is very essential in peace psychology. So it's beyond that being people waking up early in the morning, looking at the mirror and smile, think of happiness and you'll be peaceful. We actually look beyond beyond that. To what extent that our everyday life of being, let's say, being marginalized, being oppressed, and being in the system of inequality and being discriminated against, and to what extent that we are looking at peace in a perspective of an oppressed.
Yes.
It's not necessarily just a perspective of defined by the privileged, the powerful, and the ruler.
That's right.
So if we're looking at peace psychology in that way, it is beyond just being happy, that waking up in the morning and smile. It's actually really looking at that, how our community and environment, our system is designed to maintain this notion of peace.
So you're actually looking for conflict instances. You'd be constantly watching for conflict in large and small places.
Yeah, I think also in peace psychology, you are really right, Norm. Conflict can be seen as positive. So absence of conflict, it could be negative.
Yes.
So let's say a community of oppressed, of being marginalized, who are questioning the inequality and the status quo, and this may be considered not peaceful by those in authority because they're shaking the boat, but it is a journey, it's a process of peace seeking.
Yes.
And for example, in Indigenous Australian, by questioning right, and I wanted to talk about entitlement, and it is itself is a journey of peace seeking and reconciliation. But a lot of the things that it create tension by the others that do not like the journey, and I think it is obstructive, it is disruptive. And this notion of disruptive, again, is similar to the context, let's say, family, when young people is you're challenging the authority, and then you consider these young people as being naughty, being not following rules. So sometimes we're really looking at that, the spectrum, again I use the word spectrum, of peace and conflict, and that's not a binary. No. They could coexist.
And so the recognition of these small sparks of conflict, they run very, very much into the issue of resolution, don't they? So you see it and you seek to resolve it, is that right?
Yeah, I think conflict is a small spark of incident. Sometimes we need to see conflict. We need to have conflict in order to have dialogue. So if both parties were not happy, but we repressed it, unhappiness, by thinking happy thoughts, for example, and this is not going to resolve the problem that coexists in the relationship. So sometimes we need conflict to spark dialogue.
Well, you mentioned the Indigenous people instance, and in one of your articles you speak about the way in which there's been a relatively recent emergence amongst the populace in general of the fact of actual conflict. The Aboriginal wars, for example. In my own case, I didn't know about them. I went to university to do all sorts, and no one ever told me about that.
I do not know a lot about things when I was a little child as well in Malaysia. So a lot of time it's through the journey of discovery, and again, the type of history that we read.
That's right.
Like who wrote this history, and what sort of information do we receive growing up, being socialized in a bubble. Sometimes we are assuming the reality as this, but as long as we step out of that bubble, we realize, oh, that's a different paradigm, different worldview about the whole stories that we're being told. So that's my appreciation of peace psychology.
Yeah, it's a different worldview of the oppressed, which is, as you say, it's clear the victor writes the history. But with say Australia and Melbourne in particular, being one of three of the most multicultural cities in the world, how does peace psychology, where do you set yourself up in relation to being present and aware and of service in relation to the evolution of Melbourne's society or Victoria's society? Is there some process?
Well, I can speak as academic, as a researcher, and as a mediator in Melbourne. So I play my role. This is my role as an academic, as a citizens of Australia, that we do what we can as a citizen. As a I mediate community disputes when I've been called upon as part of the Department of Justice Dispute Settlement Centre Victoria. So when people ring me up that say, are you available to mediate the disputes? And often is intercultural, and I will very happy to say yes. And I do research in this area topic, including the perspective of water and multicultural, multi-religious perspective. And I'm interested in looking at the role of young people in peace building.
Yes.
And many of these young people are of diverse cultural background.
Absolutely. We must come back to this point of mediation, because there's actually a structure around that, and so we'll discuss that. But for the moment, we'll take a break. We'll be back in a minute.
Mani Allah. Alleluia. Mani Allah.
Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Siew-Fang Law. She's a senior lecturer in peace psychology, that is, at Victoria University. Siew-Fang, we were talking about mediation, and this is fascinating. So you're actually invited to mediate. How widely known is that service is available?
Yes, in fact, it is a free service for community that I think it is really important that the more people know about it, the better. So it's services funded by state government, Victoria government, and it's run by Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria. And in fact, many other service providers also offer mediations services, but my affiliation is with Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria. So it's a service mainly allowed for community who have experienced dispute with neighbours, for example, with organisations, clubs, with disagreement that would need a third party to come and involve in assisting the dialogue.
Yes.
So the third parties are the mediators, and they are trained, have accredited, and they come in. Normally in Dispute Settlement Centre is the co-mediation model, where we will set up a process to assist the party from not speaking to each other or they have a lot of misunderstanding with each other, to a point where they feel comfortable to talk about the past, the present, and move on to future about resolution. So the services is free for the community. So if, let's say, community come in the language that is not English, the centers actually organize interpreters to come along, not at the cost of the disputants, and then provide that service to ensure that the communications is being facilitated.
It sounds that that's a wonderful service, but how do you handle the cross-cultural, cross-religious implications in some of those disputes, which I presume occur?
Well, I think you raise a really good point. In fact, the centers are really, really good in terms of trying to be very sensitive about the different needs of communities when they call the centers for services, for help, for advice. And they generally have a pool of many mediators on their panel, so they'll ring up relevant mediator. For example, I've been often ring when there was intercultural disputes. So I'm really, really interested in managing and resolve dispute with community or cultural diverse background myself. So I'm generally quite happy to say yes. I'm happy to take on a role or responsibility to come on board. Again, through trainings, we actually facilitate role play, how to listen effectively, how to do active listening with each other through my conversation with my co-mediator, and hoping that the disputant will pick up some of those active listening skills and positive, constructive communication skill in the mediation process itself.
The importance being you'd use some of the skills which is used in the non-violent communications type strategy.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes, which is quite powerful. Yeah,
reframing, for example, is a really good one.
Yes, it carries with it an immense amount of skill, because even these cultural mediators, and specifically also the religious mediators, you've got language, you've got culture, you've got ethnicity. There's three which do they sometimes cause a stumbling block? How do you actually bring it together in the first place?
Well, we really believe that if we set out the process and allow time
Yes.
for people to unpack some of the perspective and paradigm,
Yeah.
and we could get somewhere. I think what happened in a lot of dispute or conflict is that there's no opportunity available for people to come together in a space where they could feel comfortable to share and exchange perspective. So what happened is that we're trying to create that space where, if this is a third party's involvement, that they felt that there was a moderated session where the perspective could be exchanged.
Yes.
I think once they are opening, and the mediator will be able to enter by guiding each other to see and understand, you actually look at this way, and you look at that the other way, and what do you get out of it? By opening questions, asking opening questions, allow each other to clarify what is that meant to them, why it is important to them.
Well, do you do any exploration or familiarisation with the individual parties, or are they always together when the mediators first meet them? So do they meet the mediators as two factions, or do the mediators work initially with one and initially with the other, gain knowledge, and then bring the two together? How does that happen?
There are many different models of mediation. At Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria, generally when disputants ring out the centre, they have a kind of advice or consultation with the staff members before they meet with the mediators.
Yes.
But as soon as they were meeting with the mediator, we are trying to already put them at the same time and same processes in the beginning. Unless this is being requested, we have to modify the process differently.
And how long have you been involved in that?
About 8 years,
8
probably.
years. Well, that's a fair time frame, because the question I was going to ask is can you see is there an escalating use as awareness grows?
I think so, yes. So the centre has very active reach out to communities. The centre have constant workshops and meeting with newly arrived migrants, refugees, community, and they have brochures printed out in all kind of languages to really hoping more people to use the services.
And it sounds as though it's something which would need the support of the community leaders, and many of those communities have a very hierarchical structure. Do you find that the community leaders get behind it? Do they support it in the main?
I believe so. Yeah, and also I think the centre also rely on councils, community organization, neighborhood house to as a source of point of contact for the services.
So it's a full community involved process, and so what the Victorian version is what, name that again for me, please. Again, the
Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria.
Oh, Victoria. And so someone who wanted to use that, they would find the phone number in the Victorian Government Services?
Generally councils and also websites, and have brochures, and many community leaders too aware of these services.
Terrific. Look, we'll need to end, but I'd also need to ask you, this is a big topic. Would you be able to come back next week and we could talk some more?
Thanks for your invitation. I would love to.
Thank you very much. You've been watching Harmony University, and we'll be back next week with Siew-Fang Law. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allah.